A pleasant day and a warm welcome to the first exclusive interview on disaster prevention and risks here in Sri Lanka. So as you all know, we are organizing, the Sri Lanka Rupavahini Corporation is hosting the ABU Media Summit to build resilience through media for a cleaner, safer and a greener tomorrow. So to build resilience through media, not focusing only the summit, the Sri Lanka Rupavahini Corporation has designed a series of exclusive interviews to educate the general public. It's some sort of a public awareness, upholding the national responsibility of the national TV, Sri Lanka Rupavahini Corporation. We are having a series of interviews, and today the first exclusive interview we are doing to make you aware about the disaster prevention and also the mechanisms related to that, and also giving you some sort of awareness. So we respectfully invited Mr. Killian Murphy. So thank you very much for being here, accepting our invitation, and he is the program management specialist in research and private sector engagement at the Asia Disaster Preparedness Center. Thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitation.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Right. Okay. So just to start off, I would like to ask you a very small question. What is ADPC?
Yeah, this is a good question. So I represent the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, ADPC. It is an intergovernmental organization. It's with a remit for working on disaster risk reduction across the region, that is the Asia Pacific region. It has been established since 1986, so it has almost 40 years of experience across the region. And we work with stakeholders across the region for our mission or vision statement, which is safer communities through disaster risk reduction and sustainable development. So as an intergovernmental organization, we have a number of board member countries, and Sri Lanka is actually one of those founding board member countries. Traditionally, ADPC has worked with governments, so in the Sri Lankan context, that would be with primarily organizations like the Disaster Management Center under the Ministry of Disaster Management, but also now our remit really is expanding to a more multi-stakeholder or all of society approach, which I'd be happy to tell you more about today.
Right, okay. And so like just starting off, focusing the Asia Pacific region, if I may ask you, in the practical scenario, there might be a strong gap between these disaster prevention and the real life crises. So in an ADPC perspective, how can you explain it to the general public?
Yeah, this is a good question, and something that we receive this question quite often. There are a number of policies and plans, for example, both at the global, regional and national level. So for example, in Sri Lanka, a lot of the disaster management work, it would be guided by something called the National Disaster Management Plan, whereas at global level, organizations like ADPC, we work towards frameworks such as the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. This would set different targets and guidance that governments and other organizations working on disaster management would work towards, but we always try to translate this and link this to the daily lived experience of the populations. So as we know, the Asia Pacific region, it's one of the most disaster prone and hazardous regions in the world, and I think Sri Lanka is no exception to that. Day to day, people will experience things like flooding, landslides, even droughts, and in coastal regions there would be cyclones and storm surges. So I think these are all things that people experience on a day-to-day basis. We see good proactive efforts from government, civil society and even private sector to contribute on disaster risk reduction and disaster management. But that being said, there's always the urge to do more and empower communities to be the first responders in those situations. So I think today is an opportunity for me to tell you not just about ADPC's work, but the work that ADPC does with local organizations in Sri Lanka, whether it be government or some of the other sectors that I've talked to you about.
Right. So you just mentioned about these intergovernmental work, the multi-sectoral engagement with disaster prevention and moreover preparedness. And also you emphasized, sir, about these private sector engagement. I would like to just emphasize a bit more. What do you expect from this private sector engagement?
Correct. This is a good question. One of the initiatives I can highlight that ADPC has been involved with the leadership from the Disaster Management Center here, is the Sri Lanka Preparedness Partnership. So Essentially, we know that a lot of the work on disaster management, the mandate is with the government to lead this work, but there's a real importance for involving other sectors, including private sector and civil society. So another key partner in this context has been the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce as a kind of coordinating body for private sector to engage them in the work of disaster management in the country. So this could be disaster management actions at different levels, and we need to think about what that means for businesses. It could mean businesses contributing to response and relief by providing supplies, but going beyond that, it could be also about them preparing their own enterprises, taking actions to be ready for flooding, storms, putting in place business continuity measures and others.
Right. Okay. And just when you talk about disasters, you mentioned about floods, storms, droughts, tsunamis, and moreover, there are many things. I mean, natural disasters. Even Sri Lanka as a country faces, Asia as a region faces, and world as an entity that they face. And giving the perspective to Asian region, we know that a disaster cannot be bound geographically or through any other means. So it can reach beyond the limits that we demarcate. So in such a situation, how the preparedness is in active play from the ADPC?
That's another interesting perspective, and it's something that's really very relevant to ADPC's work. As a regional organization, we have the oversight and opportunity to work with stakeholders in different countries. So Sri Lanka is just one of many countries that ADPC works in. We have regional platforms where we have knowledge exchange between governments. They come together to talk about policy, planning. For example, the platform that I had talked about in Sri Lanka, we have similar partnerships and platforms in other countries. So, for example, in Cambodia, Laos, Philippines, Nepal, and other countries in the region. So ADPC essentially acts as a kind of facilitating organization for knowledge exchange between countries. Obviously, the context and challenges faced by specific countries or communities differs, but there's also a lot of commonality and lessons that can be exchanged.
So Sri Lanka as a country, when compared to the region, have some prominence in disaster prevention. Am I correct?
I think so, because as we know that Sri Lanka had faced one of the mega disasters or unthinkable disasters, and actually since that time we have seen a real effort in terms of the policy and the landscape here in Sri Lanka to move towards preparedness and prevention. So even having dedicated institutions on disaster management, you could see that Sri Lanka, learning from that experience and the window of opportunity that comes after such a mega disaster, has learned and has been putting in place the measures for more proactive measures for disasters. Obviously, an event that I was talking about, such as the tsunami, is a real exceptional event, but the same principles apply for other more commonly occurring disasters that I had mentioned earlier, such as flooding, droughts, landslides, etc.
Right. So I just grabbed a few words: proactive measures, preparedness, and prevention. From all of your explanations, those words were repetitively occurring. So I believe, like, to get prepared and to have some sort of preventive mechanisms and to employ proactive measures, we as citizens and we as a country, we as a region, have to have some sort of knowledge. So these sessions basically for the ABU Media Summit to build resilience through media that will be happening recently in the 25th and 27th of November, 25th to 27th of November. So the Sri Lanka Rupavahini Corporation is hosting the ABU Media Summit to build resilience through media for a cleaner, greener, and a safer tomorrow. So those three words, I mean, repetitively I heard, and I want to emphasize it once again to the general public, the very importance of those words from the ADPC perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the key stakeholders that I hadn't mentioned earlier, in addition to government, civil society and private sector, would be media. So I think the media plays an important role, and the summit which is coming up would be one of those opportunities to really deliver the important message about preparedness and disaster management being a proactive effort on behalf of the whole population, really. So This is another aspect that ADPC focuses on in our work, together with our local partners here in Sri Lanka, is the need to work at different levels. So obviously we have talked a lot about the work that government does on institutional aspects, policies, frameworks, but ultimately in the heat of a disaster it may come down to what you as an individual know and the small steps that you can take to protect you and your family. So for example, if a flood is occurring or other hazard is facing you on a day-to-day basis, being aware of certain where your grab bag for your family, having small things ready to be prepared in a disaster, those kind of knowledge, it's very important on a day-to-day basis as well.
Right. So isn't that, is that enough for a citizen if I'm a person who is living in a flood prone area? In a citizen perspective, I just know when the floods are occurring, the environmental changes and everything, I know, a little bit of idea I do have, and I have some preparedness for a proactive measure. When this thing is happening, I should move out and I should go to a safer place or something like that. Is that idea, is that small limited knowledge is enough?
I think on a day-to-day level for citizens, it should be encouraged, because ultimately the people are the first responders when it comes to a disaster. So you will typically look after your own safety first, then you will think about your family. Also, if you're a business owner, you may want to think about the small steps that you would take for your business as well. So I think this knowledge and awareness, knowing things like the evacuation point in your community and emergency numbers and what stocks and supplies you would need in the heat of the moment or when a disaster occurs are really still important steps in the bigger context of what we are talking about here.
Yes, that's what I wanted to emphasize. So just not like merely packing the stuff and moving here and there, but you must know how to behave in this type of a situation, the evacuation point, the points of assemblies, and how the supplies do work in that event, and all the things we have to have those knowledge, and even the contact details, how those communications work. So Mr. Killian very clearly and precisely explained you in that regard. And also, sir, I would just like to mention technology, data-driven world. We always rely on data, statistics, and even the artificial intelligence comes into play. And there, we can easily access data privacy, and we just talk a lot in any subject area, in any field. Data, the technology is the most discussed topic in prevention and preparedness with regard to disasters. How technology is important?
Yeah, I would like to link this response to, again, simple measures, because I think you have talked about the use of AI, technology, and of course these are things that on a day-to-day basis, us as citizens, we are learning more about. However, in terms of disaster management work and being ready for disaster and climate-related shocks and stresses, as we call them, they come in different forms. So I think it can link to the previous point that we had talked about accessibility of information. So a lot of the work that organizations like ADPC would do would be not just working with the disaster management agencies here, but also other organizations such as the Department of Meteorology. So an important point would be early warning messaging and how the data and information that agencies like those hold can be translated and easily understood by the general population. So for example, if a storm or a cyclone is approaching, ensuring that the key information and data that is provided by those agencies, such as the Met Department or Department of Disaster Management, reaches the population in a timely and accessible manner. So I think this is the aspect of data that I would like to highlight.
Yes, so not only merely disaster management, but through meteorological departments and data absorbing different mechanisms, ADPC absorb data, not just to manage a crisis situation, but to protect and prepare the communities even before a crisis is striking.
Correct.
Right. So in that ADPC perspective, how the Asia Pacific region has been functioning? Is it, can the steps of these data analysis and the data is, obtained through ADPC sufficient for this Asia Pacific region?
Well, I think the data that's being used, it would typically come from bigger data sources that's available, and the national agencies here would be the ones that have their own local data as well. So it's usually a combination of both. The role of organizations such as ADPC is how to analyze and make use of that data, looking at longer trends in the medium to longer term, and equating that to policies, institutional frameworks, and guiding the organizations that we work with at the national level in countries like Sri Lanka and other countries in the region as well.
Right, so analyzing all these data, and ADPZ has a greater understanding, a bigger picture of how the Asia Pacific region work, and in Sri Lanka also those data from these departments and bigger data analysis, fora or any other engagements, you absorb data, analyze them, and also you just employ them for the betterment of the communities.
Indeed, I think it goes back to my point about translating science and data to easily understandable information and steps that can be applied by the communities at the local level. A lot of the programs that ADPC has done, it's about awareness raising and mobilization. So, for example, the platform that I had talked about earlier, the Sri Lanka Preparedness Partnership, it's coordinated and led by organizations such as Disaster Management Center, Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, but also the civil society has a big role to play there. So having these different stakeholders working together, it's extremely useful in the sense that often we talk about disaster management, it could be seen as a technical or scientific subject. But having organizations such as civil society involved, there are strategies and measures in which that can be translated into the local context. And we know that Sri Lanka, it's a diverse society, right? Messaging needs to also be contextualized for different parts of the country, communities and groups as well.
Right. Okay, so you mentioned about these community levels, and earlier also you explained about the ground level impact, because when a disaster is hit, the communities, the individuals in small entities might be in larger in certain events like tsunami. They are the people who are affected from these types of situations. So when you discuss about the resilience of communities, and in that perspective, the Asia Pacific region and even in Sri Lanka, the data and the preparedness with all these proactive measures taken by ADPZ involving these multi-sectoral intergovernment engagement. With that, I would like to question you, sir, in that perspective, are there any methods, are there any ways that the communities can scale up their resilience in terms of this, what they have achieved now?
Yeah, so in terms of the community work that ADPC does, generally we do not work directly at the local level. As I mentioned, we would work in partnerships with organizations here. So there would be some particular principles that we would usually follow, whereby we look at the existing structures. So I think in the Sri Lanka context, this could be down to district level or even lower level. I think you all know better than me, it could be down to village level. How we can capacitate and build the capacity and awareness of those groups for the kind of outreach and dissemination in the community. So by strengthening the existing structures, this is really the approach that ADPC and partners would follow. It could be providing technical guidance, it could be training on a particular subject such as accessing early warning information, in some cases provision of equipment or useful items that would be needed in disaster response. ADPC's mandate and organizations like us, it's typically on preparedness. So building the capacity and ability to respond to a disaster, but ahead of time. So this is the principles really that we follow.
Right. So in the ADPC perspective, you always mention ahead of time, preparedness, the proactive measures. If the ground level, if the district levels, in lower levels, because each and every citizen cannot be reached from ADPC perspective. So they have to have some sort of a greater mechanism to reach them, and also a more strong foundation, and also the coordination and everything. So ADPC is diverting the technical guidance, assistance and everything that is needed for a country to achieve those, and even in terms of equipment, that's what you was mentioning. And also, sir, like in that regard, I just want to, in recent scenarios, have you understood any issues in Asia Pacific region and or in Sri Lanka with regard to any preparedness or any proactive measures with your perspective?
Yeah, I think this links to the need for the understanding of the bigger outlook. We will see that we're basically living in a changing world, right, in many aspects, and that includes the climate context in which we live. So, as I had mentioned earlier, we see that the disasters which are faced over a period of time, 20 or 30 years, they change, right? They might be similar hazards which people face, such as flooding, landslides, cyclones, but really the intensity and frequency at which they are being experienced, it's been proven through data that they are increasing and becoming more frequent in terms of intensity. So this is something that we also need to be aware of when we are planning our disaster management strategies, how it equates to planning, policy, and even for businesses, how they plan their investments and put in place strategies for their day-to-day operations as well.
Right. So in that regard, what you was explaining is like the knowledge, the experience, the infrastructure that is being shared through these ADPC perspective to these communities, governments. If there is any issue in absorbing them, they should duly attend to them. They should enhance their knowledge and they should employ them. Whatever the discussion, whatever the awareness or any mechanism that the ADPC is doing, they should be absorbed correctly from the government level and the communities.
Yeah, one point I would like to emphasize though is the locally led aspect of this. ADPC, we are a regional organization, so most of the initiatives that we do, it's in partnership and led by the local institutions that I have been talking about through initiatives such as the Sri Lanka Preparedness Partnership and other initiatives that ADPC works on together with the Department of Meteorology,
Chamber of Commerce. Yes. Right. Okay. So when just coming to a general perspective with regard to a global perspective, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I had referenced a bit earlier different guidance that organization like ADPC follows. So I had mentioned the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. There's also other higher level climate commitments that countries have. So we typically look at these guidance and the messaging that is there and how this would equate to a national context such as Sri Lanka. So one of the things that I always point to as someone who works on disaster management, not just in Sri Lanka, but in different countries, is the emphasis on the whole of society approach. So this idea of the multi-stakeholder approach to disaster management, but really it has to go beyond just institutions and systems, but also individuals as well. So I think, again, this is where the importance of organizations such as media comes in, right? The ability to reach populations at a mass scale, putting in place small messaging or advice on how citizens could be better prepared for disasters in very small practical ways, which we had touched on earlier.
Right. So as the program management specialist for ADPC, are there any experience that the rest of the world can obtain from the Asian region in terms of disaster preparedness?
Yes, I think for me, I'm not from the region, right? I'm originally from the UK, but I see that countries in Asia, in particular Sri Lanka, a certain amount of the resilience comes from experience of experiencing hazards and natural disasters frequently, and as we've mentioned, the intensity of those events is often increasing. So I think the practical experience that people learn from disasters and the windows of opportunity that come when a disaster strikes are really key, because oftentimes policy change, putting in place new strategies, it requires a bit of a shock to the system to get them in place. So I think this is where when a disaster occurs, it can often be a devastating event, but it can also be an opportunity for change, right? Putting in place new systems, perspective change, new policies, and that can come down to very small examples. So for me, a lot of my work, it focuses on the private sector. Thinking about another country context, Thailand, which is where ADPC is headquartered, there's also major flooding that takes place there. So back in 2011, there was a major flood in Thailand, and we always consider that as one of the sea change events, if you put it like that, maybe similar to the tsunami in Sri Lanka, where it was a bit of a perspective change. In that case, it was businesses seemed to change their perspective, that putting in place measures such as business continuity or business recovery measures were really important to safeguard assets ahead of time and ensure business continuity when a disruptive event occurs. So I think the same principles apply more generally in society, right? We can learn from disaster events and improve ourselves and make sure that we respond more efficiently and effectively in the future.
It's not the traditional approach. It's not the disaster that came 10, 15 years before hit in the same manner today or tomorrow in 2025 or in 2030 or whatever in the future that might change. So always we have to have some change, we have to be educated, and we have to get prepared for any change, and even policy wise, technology wise, everything changes. So ADPC and what the experiments and explanations, the initiatives that you mentioned were very important. I think just it's not like we have to be prepared to face the flood in 2030, not that what we faced in 2010.
Correct. I think it's a case of learning, applying the learnings efficiently. A lot of the work that ADPC does, it's about documenting and knowledge exchange, as I mentioned. So experiences from one country can also be shared to others, and I think likewise the summit which is coming up, it's a chance for Sri Lanka to showcase some of its experiences. The stakeholders that I have mentioned here, the Disaster Management Centre, Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, civil society, they all have good case studies to share. They also have experiences that they could have done better, and also documenting these good practices and sharing it both in Sri Lanka and across the region. I think it's a very important and effective initiative that's coming up.
And also, as you mentioned previously, media has a very strong ability and capacity to do some more to the civil society and to the general community in terms of disaster preparedness at a time where this ABU Media Summit is in action.
Correct. I think the role of media, journalists being well versed on the subject of disaster and climate risks is very important, so that the messaging which goes out to the general public is consistent, scientifically sound, and provides practical advice for the general population.
Right, so that resilience that we are trying to build through media for a cleaner, safer and a greener tomorrow in terms of disaster preparedness. So media has a very strong capacity. Media has something more to do, as Mr. Killian Murphy very clearly explained. It's some sort of a national responsibility. So the Sri Lanka Rupavahini Corporation is hosting the ABU Media Summit, and yes, this series of discussions were in line to emphasize the general public, not focusing merely on the media summit, SLRC not just merely hosting the ABU Media Summit, but to give a national perspective, a community level awareness and a global awareness, it seems, in terms of disaster preparedness and these risks that Sri Lanka encounter and as a region that we encounter. So thank you very much. And finally, I want just to listen final remarks from you in this type of a situation, in this type of an environment, as the disaster management or the program management specialist in ADPC. What can you share with the Sri Lankan people?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think the main message would be that proactive disaster management and risk reduction, it's really an all of society responsibility and approach. This is not just coming from the frameworks which guide this kind of work, but based on our own experiences of experiencing disasters or hazardous events on a day-to-day basis. So I think the final message would just be that managing disasters and responding to them is really everybody's responsibility. Organizations such as ADPC, we are here to help, but the emphasis really is the support and technical guidance which we're able to work with together with local organizations here in Sri Lanka. So thank you very much for the time today.
let's get prepared for disasters.
Indeed.
Right. Okay, so thank you very much for being here, Mr. Killian Murphy, the Program Management Specialist in Research and Private Sector Engagement from Asia Disaster Preparedness Center. So thank you very much for being present here and engaging in a fruitful discussion for the very first exclusive interview for Sri Lanka Rupavahini Corporation. And a situation we are hosting, the Sri Lanka Rupavahini Corporation is hosting the ABU Media Summit. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have a discussion with you for a community level awareness. So thank you very much. And also this will be another good series to make aware the general public about disasters, how preparedness, how prevention of the disasters, how the risks could be mitigated and everything. We are sharing knowledge, focusing the ABU Media Summit as Sri Lanka Rupavahini Corporation is hosting the particular event. We are giving this community level the awareness to the general public to create a better Sri Lanka for the future. Thank you very much. Have a pleasant day.